Hello there, my name is Esther de las Casas, and I am the communications lead at MentAbacus. Now, if you've been following this series, you'll know that Dan is, well, a bit of a mystery guest. He was supposed to be here, but somehow there's always a reason he can't make it. This time, he's off to a birthday party. And in classic Dan fashion, he would have completely forgotten if I hadn't reminded him. So today you're stuck with me. And our theme is Vienna Calling, Why the Young Astronauts Aren't a Freudian Slip. This summer, we've been traveling through Europe together, not just in geography, but in spirit. We stopped in Weimar to reflect on culture and its fragility. We walked through Prague, where windows and words became battlefields of faith and power. We climbed to Berchtesgaden and faced the weight of history pressing down from the mountains. Each of these episodes highlighted some aspect of human nature, history, and language. And now our journey brings us to Vienna, a city of grandeur and fragility, of music and psychology, of empire and decline. And here today, we dive into Vienna's most radical contribution, the discovery that even within ourselves, things are not stable. At the turn of the 20th century, Vienna was a strange mix of imperial pomp and simmering tension. The Habsburg monarchy still ruled, but cracks were visible. The empire was outwardly grand, the Ringstrasse lined with palaces, the court glittering, but under the surface, anxieties brewed. And into this world was born Sigmund Freud. He lived from 1856 to 1939, long enough to see the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapse, long enough to witness Europe sliding into dictatorship and war from which he fled in his final year. From Vienna, Freud reshaped the way we see ourselves. He declared that humanity had suffered three great insults to the ego. First, Copernicus showed that the Earth is not the center of the universe. Second, Darwin taught that humanity is not apart, but kin to the animals. And third, Freud's own contribution, that we are not masters in our own house. The conscious mind is not sovereign. Much of what drives us comes from the depths, fears, desires, half-forgotten childhood experiences. That was Vienna's gift to the modern world, the unsettling truth that beneath the polished surface of city, of empire, of self, there are forces we cannot fully control. Vienna was also the place where Freud met the man he once called his crown prince, Carl Gustav Jung. The year was 1907. Jung was a young psychiatrist from Switzerland. He traveled to Vienna to meet Freud, and the story goes they spoke for 13 hours straight. Imagine the energy in that room. Two brilliant minds circling the mysteries of the unconscious, discovering in each other a kindred spirit. For a time, Freud and Jung were close, almost like father and son. But within just a few years, the friendship cracked. Why? Because they saw the unconscious differently. For Freud, the unconscious was about repression. Childhood memories, hidden desires, forces we push down, but which shape us anyway. For Jung, that was far too narrow. He believed the unconscious was also filled with symbols, myths, and archetypes, patterns shared across humanity. Freud looked at instinct. Jung looked at imagination. So what exactly did Jung add? He said, beneath our personal memories and experiences lies something deeper, a collective unconscious. A shared storehouse of images and patterns that humanity keeps returning to across cultures and centuries. He called these patterns archetypes. They are not characters in the brain, but recurring shapes in story and imagination. The hero, the trickster, the mother, the wise old man, the shadow. The shadow is perhaps the most unsettling. It's the part of ourselves we don't want to see, the traits we deny or repress. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It acts from the dark, shaping choices and fears until we learn to face it. And then there is individuation, Jung's word for the lifelong journey of becoming whole. It means weaving together the different parts of the psyche into something integrated. Not perfect, not pure, but whole. This was Jung's vision, that inner life has its own grammar, a kind of symbolic syntax. Where Freud gave us repression and instinct, Jung gave us archetypes and myth. And these archetypes don't just live in psychology textbooks, they live in our culture. Take the hero. It's the oldest story we know. Think of Siegfried, slaying the dragon and awakening Brunhilde. Or Odysseus battling storms and temptations on his way home. The same pattern appears in modern form, Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, Simba in The Lion King. The journey is always the same. A call to adventure, trials and mentors, the confrontation with the shadow, the return transformed. Or take the trickster. This figure appears everywhere from folklore to literature. Till Irlenspiegel, the German prankster, mocking the mighty. Mephistopheles in Goethe's Faust, clever and destabilizing, exposing hidden weaknesses. Puck, Shakespeare's mischievous sprite, delighting in confusion and chaos. And in our own time, the Joker, laughing at the collapse of order. The trickster unsettles us, but also forces us to see the world differently. Look closely at the world's most powerful stories, and these same figures keep reappearing. Culture itself seems to retell the patterns of the psyche, dressing them in new costumes for each age. Of course, we need to add some distance here. Archetypes are not mathematics. They are not a hard science. You cannot measure a hero under a microscope or plot the trickster on a brain scan. But that does not make them useless. Quite the opposite. They give us a shared language to talk about inner ideas that otherwise remain unspoken. They allow us to trade images, stories, and symbols, to say shadow or hero's journey and immediately open a whole field of meaning. And when we notice that time and again the world's best-selling films and novels follow these shapes, we might treat that as a kind of soft evidence. Not data in the laboratory sense, but a sign that these forms resonate generation after generation across cultures. Archetypes, in that sense, are less a science and more a kind of grammar, a symbolic syntax for human imagination. And yet language itself, not only symbols, also shapes our world. Language is never neutral. It is also a tool of power. We've seen how words can be used to persuade, to dominate, to inspire, and how silence, omission, and what is left unsaid can be just as powerful. This is why playing with language is dangerous. Words are woven into feelings, and feelings into thought. Manipulate language deeply enough, and you can even reshape the way people think. George Orwell's 1984 captured this. If you erase words for freedom, for rebellion, for hope, you do more than censor speech. You shrink imagination itself. When we speak together, we are not just exchanging words. We are, in a way, thinking aloud together. And really, who would oppose that? But there is another factor shaping our existence, one that often goes unnoticed. Call it control scripts, expressed through the inner voice that tells us we can't do something, shouldn't try, must stay within limits. Where does this voice come from? I believe it is an inheritance from our earliest days as hunter-gatherers. Back then, any risk could be deadly. Eat the wrong berry, cross the wrong river, confront the wrong animal, descend it, and life might end. By contrast, missing a chance at cherries was unfortunate, but not fatal. Our brains evolved a bias, better safe than sorry. Negativity weighs more heavily than opportunity. That bias kept our ancestors alive, but today it often keeps us small. It whispers conformity, warns against risk, tells us to stay inside the lines. That is why, back in 2008, I wrote the Ingredients of Success Rules as a part of the book project Red Rubber Duck's Learning and Study Skill Guide. They were meant as a unified statement, something to be read together, not dissected apart. But one phrase has always stayed with me. Do not accept limitations that other people place on you, and get rid of the limitations you put on yourself. Especially that last part, get rid of the limitations you put on yourself. Because in the end, our greatest enemy is often not out there. It is inside. That inner voice of caution, whispering of boundaries and dangers, has a tendency to take over, to dominate more than it should. Caution matters, but if it rules us, life itself slips away. So let me ask you, do you live life or does life live you? That is why I believe the real frontier today is not only outer space or technology or institutions. It is the inner voice. The voice that tells you to conform, to shrink, to avoid risk. The voice that whispers that you cannot. In Vienna, history shows us that the grand façades are only half the story. The real tension lies within. And that's true not only of history, but of each of us. Freud showed us that much of our mind works beyond our control. Jung gave us a symbolic language of archetypes, heroes, tricksters, and shadows, to speak about it. But what does this mean for us today? It means that the voices shaping our lives are not only political or cultural. They are also the inner voices, sometimes encouraging, often limiting, that whisper boundaries and caution. In our earlier episodes, we have examined this phenomenon, and there's even a full episode titled Aim High, Young Astronauts. Because one of the greatest adventure of our time may be to reclaim courage, to aim high and not to hand over the script of our lives to caution alone. For me, this is not just theory. It has been a long journey with the inner limiting voice playing on loop at times. Luckily, the 2 negative soundtracks started annoying me too much, so I decided to ignore it every here and then. One idea I always had on my mind was to put certain ideas into writing. So, to counter the inner voice, I began outlining Red Rubber Duck's Learning and Study Skill Guide around 2003. The book was published in 2008. Later, around 2009, came the Ingredients of Success, almost like a manifesto for the project. In the following years, more than a decade, I felt those tools needed to be taken further, refined, translated into something hands-on, something embodied in a real physical tool. So I kept developing, thinking, and tinkering. There were new jobs, moves across continents, new legal skills, and even more importantly, invaluable business experience. Along the way, I learned not only how to build ideas, but also how to align them with real-world strategy, turning concepts into practical, scalable solutions. But the project always stayed with me, like an inner best buddy, a quiet source of meaning, depending only on me. Finally, all that effort, work, and analysis inspired an invention. And again, by pushing past the inner voice's cautionary whispers, I developed it into a formal patent application. The project has turned those early ideas into a concrete tool, the MentAbacus. And this week, I learned that the patent project looks promising. That too feels like a moment of renewal, almost like a birthday. So as we close our stop in Vienna with Freud, Jung, music, empire, and psychology echoing in the background, I leave you with this. Perhaps it's worth asking ourselves, how many of the limits we live with come from outside? And how many do we quietly place on ourselves? Vienna teaches us this. Even beneath the grand facades, the real drama is inside. And the real power, the power to rise, to aim high, is still ours. And that brings us to the end of today's journey through Vienna, Freud, Jung, archetypes, and those inner voices that shape us. But of course, Vienna has more to offer than psychology and philosophy. There are the grand halls of Schönbrunn, the resting place of emperors in the Kapuzinergruft, the wine taverns of Grinzing, and of course, the coffee houses, Sachertorte, and maybe even a waltz or two. And in view of these broad offers, we made the wise choice and did it all. So until next time, live life, don't let life live you. And who knows, maybe Dan will finally make an appearance. Though between us, I wouldn't bet on it. See you in the next episode. And last but not least, remember, as Dan always says, learning isn't a trend. Structure still works. Square, not hip. Visit us at MentAbacus.com.
Every story needs structure.
Every mind needs a map.
MentAbacus. Square, not hip.